But before I even jump into Azure Lighthouse, I'm going to be talking about our recommendations and best practices, as well as the different levels of access and the different services that allow customers to delegate access to you, our partners. And then I'll also walk you through a demo of actually setting up Lighthouse, Azure Lighthouse, in this case for Defender for Cloud, since that's what we're talking about today. 2 weeks from now, we're going to do the Sentinel piece. And so during that time, we'll likely do a demo with Sentinel as well. All right, so let's start with which identity are, because we understand that as managed security service providers, you guys have a huge responsibility when managing security services for your customers. So whether it is to access customer resources, to manage something like Defender for Cloud or Sentinel via Azure Lighthouse, or managing your customers' Defender 365 tenants, and that is actually done using GDAP or B2B. The MSSPs identities have to exist somewhere, right? So the challenge is sometimes is deciding if your MSSPs identities are going to exist within the corporate tenant, or if you're going to create a separate MSSP tenant to manage your customers. To me personally, there's only one option, but I'm still going to walk you through all the possibilities, and I'll tell you my opinion in a little bit. And this is based on personal experience. So we start with the single identity model. And by the way, there's a white paper that was created by the Sentinel team. It's called Microsoft Sentinel Technical Playbook for MSSPs. And I'll probably link it in the chat and a little later. It includes a section on Azure AD tenant topologies where they go over the pros and the cons of single identity model versus multiple identities models. So I encourage everyone to go through that white paper. I think the information in there is valuable for any MSSP, even if it's focused on Sentinel. But let's start with this model, right? So this is the single identity model. This is where the MSSP corporate identity is used to access customer security services. And I can see this model working for like a POC, where you're just testing the configuration, but not really to access real customers. And yes, it is supported, but I just wouldn't recommend it as a final configuration with this being the end goal. The reason is attacks on your corporate identities are not only going to risk your corporate data, but they're also going to risk your customers' data, and vice versa as well. Any customer attacks may also spread to to corporate resources. And then we have this model. So that's the multiple identities model. This is where a new separate tenant is deployed to manage the identities that have access to customer security services. And this model really reduces the blast radius associated with any credential device or hybrid infrastructure compromise. And as we all know, there are many risks associated with corporate tenants where the employee accounts are used for day-to-day activities like email, for example, because of course you're going to be risked there could be phishing emails, or there could be other types of attacks on your devices. So this is a more secure model. And again, we're going to go with that zero trust model in mind, specifically the assume breach principle. So this is the ideal model to protect both your corporate resources as well as your customer resources. And by the way, identity isolation, which is this model, it's also one of the CSP security best practices, which I've actually linked here in the presentation. So if you go through those CSP practices, you'll see that it talks about identity isolation and many other best practices, but it's a good source of how to make sure that you're secure in order to protect yourself and your customers. And also, if you're supporting or you're planning to support government organizations or organizations that need to meet government compliance requirements, then this model is what you're going to have to follow, because they don't, certain regulations that they have in place are going to prevent you from using or from having any identities that corporate identities accessing customer data. And yes, it requires more work. I know that it does, but it is possible to configure, and it is also possible to automate as much as possible. In fact, Travis and I are going to be talking about some of this identity automation, what is possible within Azure AD in the sessions that we're going to cover on Thursday. So stay tuned for some of that stuff coming up. And one quick note, this identity needs to be protected. So the same recommendations that apply to securing identities still apply to MSSP. So that means working with a phishing-resistant authentication method, which again we'll go into on Thursday, using conditional access to ensure policies like if you're using PAWS, and you should be, those privileged access workstations to access customer resources. And of course, using identity protection to respond to user and signing risk, among others. And if you're not doing this right now, then you really should be. There's a lot, many of my partners are already doing this. And like we always say that we've never seen a partner go this direction and regretted it, but we've seen partners go the other direction and regretted it. So sharing with you, this is the way that it should be. And then I have this third one, which I don't know that I would call it a model, but it's still an option. So I wanted to mention this as well. You should have separate identities. You could have separate identities within the same corporate tenant. I'm calling them here admin identity, which is separate from the corporate identity. And that admin identity has no access to corporate email or other corporate resources. It is similar to what is explained in the Microsoft documentation that I've linked here, which is talking about protecting Microsoft 365 from on-prem attacks. And the scenario that is described in that document is not for MSSPs, but it is specifically targeted to use cloud-only accounts for Azure AD and Microsoft 365 privilege roles, which is exactly what an MSSP SOC analyst will have assigned to them on customers' tenants. So I see this option maybe as like a bare minimum for an MSSP, maybe one that doesn't have the resources yet to manage a separate tenant and has no plans also to support customers that have to meet government compliance requirements, because this wouldn't fly. Although you will still need to take into consideration the additional configuration and processes to manage those accounts as user entitlements, because they're still separate, right? So the automation that we're going to talk about Thursday would still apply in this case. Okay, so now we're going to dig into permissions, and we actually get a lot of questions. I wrote a blog on this, and I got a lot of questions. So I'm going to try to go through some of the questions that I got in here. And so this was the best representation I could find, even though it's not perfect, but hopefully it gets the message across. So we're going to start with subscription level here permissions, or really resource level permissions, right? That are going to probably exist at subscription level, but they can also exist at management group level. And for security services specifically, these are some of the roles that Azure RBAC roles that you're familiar with. Like for Sentinel, you have Sentinel contributor operator, and there's a few other ones. I just had so much space here. And then for Defender for Cloud, which is what we're talking about this week, you have security admin and security reader, but that's not the same, even though they were named pretty close. Security admin is not the same as security administrator, which is at tenant level. So, and by the way, these are the same permissions. They apply to Defender for Cloud as well as Defender for IoT. So if you're doing that, then these are the permissions. So now we move up to tenant level, right? So it could be, those are where your Defender 365 services come in, right? And MDE, Defender for Cloud apps, even some of your Azure Entra services are going to be at tenant level, right? So if you're managing that for your customers, then you're going to need to use, you're going to need to assign these tenant level permissions. And we're covering the permissions first because you're going to see different tools to do different things. There's different tools to delegate these permissions, and there's different tools for delegating the tenant level permissions. So this, access to security.microsoft.com, that's going to be security administrator or security reader, which is a tenant level permission. Okay, so let's see, move on. Now, so this is where GDAP comes into place. I'm actually going to start first with this level, the tenant level area, and then I'll go into this one, which is the Azure Lighthouse. But first, we're going to start with this one. So that's where GDAP comes into place. And we're starting, again, tenant level. So most of you are likely familiar with the concept of B2B, or basically those guests that are invited and added to tenants. However, MSSPs are sometimes restricted, and they sometimes there's compliance requirements, sometimes actually cybersecurity insurance requirements that prevent them from creating guest accounts and customer tenants. So that's where GDAP comes into place. And GDAP is Granular Delegated Admin Privileges. And you might have been familiar with the old one, the DAP one, but we're trying to migrate everyone to GDAP now. So, and I'm not doing like a whole deep dive on GDAP in this 30 minutes. I just want to cover kind of the basics of GDAP, of what it is. It's a secure option that is going to allow our partners to access customer tenants using least privilege access, following that same zero trust model. And I'm saying least privilege because the previous one, DAP, I think it was global admin, and that was it. Whereas now with GDAP, we are implementing the principle of least privilege, and so that it allows you to give you more granular permissions. So it's going to allow you to have granular and time-bound access to your customer workloads, both in production, in test, in dev, wherever they exist. So GDAP is actually configured using Partner Center, and it is exclusively for partners that are cloud solution providers or CSPs. And in the link here, you can get a list of the supported workloads, which includes Azure Active Directory portal, like I was telling you about, also Exchange Admin, Purview, Microsoft 365, Microsoft 365 Defender, Intune, among others. And again, just remember that we're all talking tenant level with GDAP. And it does need to be explicitly granted to partners by their customers. So as a partner, you would go through Partner Center, and then you would invite your customers to grant you GDAP access, and then they can approve your request. So customers can actually use the Microsoft 365 Admin Center to approve those requests from partners. When you're completing that request, that's where you're going to specify the roles and the duration, because after that time, it's going to expire automatically. And also, one thing to keep in mind is if the customer currently has DAP, which is the old type of delegation, they will first have to remove those DAP roles, which I think it was reseller relationship type, before they can approve the new GDAP request. So something to keep in mind. And by the way, we have tools. The team that runs this GDAP, actually they have tools to migrate. So if you have customers that are currently using DAP and need to be migrated, do reach out, because there are tools available to make it easier. Okay, so once the customer approves the set of roles that you requested, then you can assign those customer approved roles to security groups in your tenant. So that's where you're going to be assigning in to specific people, or your teammates within your tenant. Once the customer has approved them, then you can assign them. A few things to keep in mind. So MSSP users from your partner tenant are not going to be visible in the customer's Azure AD list, which is actually one of the GDAP benefits, since some compliance requirements prevent them from existing there. And then also either side, either the partner or the customer, can terminate their relationship before it actually automatically expires. So if at any time it needs to be, that partnership needs to be terminated, that can happen. But if neither side terminates it, then the relationship is going to automatically expire when the duration of the GDAP invitation has passed. And you're going to get some emails notifications. You get at 30 days, 7 days, and 1 day before the GDAP expiration date. I think GDAP is better than B2B because it doesn't create a copy of your partner identity into each of those customer tenants like B2B does. So it just stores a pointer to a group in the partner's tenant, and it uses something called cross-tenant access policy and cross-tenant role assignment. So this is something that it's better for you, better for your customer, and better for your auditors. They're going to be happier. All right. So now onto the tool. Now we're moving on to the subscription level permissions, right? So how do you grant resource level access? So that's where Azure Lighthouse come into play, right? And these are some of the slides that I actually stole from the ARC team to show you this because they work together quite great. So earlier we saw GDAP uses identity protection. Well, in the case of Azure Lighthouse, it uses resource projection. So you still, your user still remains only within your tenant. So you're not going to see your user in your customer tenant with this one. They still get access to the resources on your customer subscriptions. And I'm actually going to show that in the demo. But the setup for this one is done within your tenant. So this one's actually not done through Partner Center, which is the reason why I can show you because I don't have access to Partner Center. And technically you have two options. One is you can actually create an offer in the marketplace, and you should, and that should be like your ultimate goal. But the other one is to use a template. So if you're doing a POC, then you can use a template to begin with, and that's what I'm going to show you during the demo. And normally you can start with the template as you work your way through initial planning, and then you kind of graduate to being able to publish that offer in the marketplace. But the permissions are exactly the same, and it works the exact same way. It's just it makes it easier for the customer to onboard you or to delegate access to your team. All right, so I'm just gonna go through this so that I can get to the demo. And adding Lighthouse to combine with Azure Arc, and this is important, especially for Defender for Cloud, because when you manage Defender for Cloud for your customers, you're going to have to manage resources on various clouds and on-prem as well. So Arc then really becomes your best friend, especially when it comes to servers, databases, and containers. They all use Arc to basically make management of those resources behave as if they were Azure resources, regardless of wherever they exist. And these are just a few of the additional services that Arc, and then you kind of saw some of this, and Sentinel is one of those that will cover 2 weeks from now. But this is a final representation that shows you how Contoso, being the MSSP in this case, is able to manage security services for customers wherever they are. So you see how using Lighthouse and Azure Arc allows that partner, the MSSP, to access all the resources for the customers. This was one that I showed in the chat earlier to let you know that you don't necessarily need to pay for Azure Arc if you're using it for some of these solutions. So this is something to keep handy. That's one that I just always get questions on. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing. This is my customer, and I'm gonna start on the customer side first so that you can see what the customer sees. So this is Azure Lighthouse, and it's gonna show as service providers, but if it is Lighthouse, this is Azure Lighthouse, you can see here. So the customer is going to be able to add an offer, meaning they're going to be able to delegate access to you, our partners, either via marketplace, like I was saying. Like this should be your ultimate goal, to be able to publish your own offer here to manage any of the securities. Like you can see Sentinel here, and you can see some other ones here. And then, but I'm going to do this via template, or the ones that I did here are via template because not a partner, so I can't publish an offer. So you see them listed here, but this is how the customer would do that. But I'm going to create one, and I'm going to go to the to Lighthouse from the MSSP side, which in this case, I actually go to my customers. That's the Lighthouse, Azure Lighthouse on the MSSP side. And I can actually create that ARM template, or I can publish an offer and just follow the instructions from here. I'm going to create the ARM template, which I'm actually not going to create it because it's already done, but I'm just going to walk you through it so you see what the options that you get. And you can request your customers to delegate access to you at either subscription level or resource group level. Most of the time it's going to be subscription level. And in fact, like in the case of Defender for Cloud, you're going to need to do it at subscription level because that's the resources are going to exist, and you're going to be able to configure them at resource level. But there are some resources that you might need to do it at resource group level, so you can do that. And then you add the permissions, and you can add the permissions user group or service principal if you're using some kind of automation. And obviously, we recommend that you do group level because you're going to have people coming in and out of your teams, and so it just makes more sense to do it at group level, so you don't have to redo it over again. And I'm using this one because that's the one that I normally use, but you can pick any kind of group. And this is where you choose the permissions. So the roles for MDC, for Defender for Cloud, is going to be security admin or security reader. Those are the ones that you're going to need to delegate. And then the other one, and I'm going to choose this one. And by the way, you can do it permanent or eligible, which would work if you're familiar with PIM, which is Privileged Identity Management. It works pretty much the same way, where you would have a maximum time once you activate it, and you can enforce multi-factor authentication, and you can even require approval before you activate it. I'm just going to leave it permanent for now. But the one that I always recommend partners do, and to the same exact group, whatever it could be like your SOC level 1, SOC level 2, you probably have different groups that you're going to assign different permissions. But the other one that I recommend that you include is the reader, just the plain old reader, because if you don't add that one, then you're actually not going to be able to see your customers like I will in a minute. And so then you can view that template, and you can download this template. And by the way, there are some situations in which you might need to modify this template. I actually wrote some blogs on that, but it mostly affects Sentinel, where you not only need permissions, but you need to allow your SOC analyst to assign additional permissions within the customer tenant. And to be able to do that, you can't configure it through here. You have to download this template and then modify it with following the instructions in the documentation. And since I wrote a blog on that, I'm actually going to put it in the chat later so that you can see that in case you need it. All right, so once you download this, then your customers, all they do is they just come here to add the offer via template, drop the file, and that's it. You're good to go. And like in this case, this was my MDC plan offer. And you can see they have security admin permissions. And by the way, I have other offers with the same provider, which is the reason why I'm able to see the customers on the other side. But then when you come here, you're able to see your customers. I have 2 different customers, this one, 3MM834 and Contoso. And I can also see the subscriptions that have been delegated. This one have different types of permissions. This one has Sentinel, and this one has Defender for Cloud. And so what that allows you to do is to then come here through environment settings. And this is the reason why I'm able to see not only the subscriptions that exist within my tenant, but also the subscriptions that are associated with other tenants that have delegated access to me. So both of these, and what that allows me to do is that I can then, for my customers, I can go in and enable these services, and I can, do all the modifications and anything that I need to do, as long as I have security admin. You can also have the security reader, which just allows you to see that, not just make changes. But this is what allows me to see various different tenants and then various different subscriptions from here. And I have 2 minutes left in my presentation. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat, but if not, I was going to cover real fast the AWS and GCP because there were questions earlier on that, Indranil.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, let's see. So the piece, there was a question there. How can we leverage Partner Center if the identities we are using are part of a separate tenant, not the partner's main tenant? Oh, yeah, it does it needs to be associated. Your MSSP tenant needs to be associated as a CSP tenant in Partner Center. So in order to be able to do this. So I have partners that are doing this right now, and so I know that it is possible to do. But if you have any issues with that, don't hesitate to reach out, because we have a few partners that are going through the same exact configuration, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, so I'm just going to cover AWS real fast and GCP. So this is my personal tenant, and I've actually added, in my case in AWS, I have a management account, which has one child account, and I know that's not very common, but typically you're going to have one management account with a whole bunch of child accounts, and very similar with GCP. Where you have projects and I'm not great with GCP, so I don't know if it's called a management project or what it's called. But you would add them here. You would go and add AWS. I'm just going to run through AWS, and you can add either the management or the single account. If you add the management, but you want to exclude some of the accounts, you just enter them here. And once you enter, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to cover the same number. And all you're doing here, by the way, is, and do pay attention when you're configuring the subscription that you're going to associate this with, because some of the agents, when you do the, like when you configure for example, the automatic deployment of Azure Monitor agent, that piece is done at subscription level. So the subscription that you choose here is going to be very important. For those AWS EC2s, and the same thing for GCP. And then you just pick, I'm just going to pick sample one, so you can see what you get. You get to configure the various Defender plans, similar to what Indranil was talking about earlier, and the databases and the containers as well, and even the free CSPM and the new one, the Defender CSPM. You can also configure that here for AWS and GCP. And some of these are actually pretty, by the way, you get to choose the same things between your plan 1 and plan 2, like you would with an Azure account. I was saying in the chat that I really recommend any cloud VMs, whether they are on Azure or AWS or GCP, would go with the plan 2. And actually, there are some features in here, even though it's not listed here. One like JIT, which is just-in-time access, is actually available for AWS EC2s as well. And so the agentless vulnerability scanning is also available for, although it might be available. No, it's only available with P2. So some of those features are, for me, I think they're really worth it. But once you choose whatever you're going to do, it's actually going to download a CloudFormation template. So it actually does everything for you. And then all you do is go to AWS and upload this CloudFormation template. And there used to be an issue where, and actually I'm not logged into my AWS account right now, but there used to be an issue where if you're, like when you downloaded this file, the first one is fine, but then the second one, it comes with the parentheses here. And AWS used to have an issue where if you created a template and had this parentheses here, it would error out, but they've actually recently fixed that. So other than that, I don't see any other really issues with doing it. And in here, it just tells you the permissions that it's going to create when it does that. And the GCP is very, very similar. And hold on, I'm gonna add one. Test, and again, see, they use organization or single project. So that's the difference there. In the case of GCP, instead of doing a template, they do a script that you can then run through Cloud Shell with GCP. But that's pretty much the only difference other than that. And then you have to give it, I think they say to give it 24 to 48 hours or something like that. But for me, it pretty much immediately started, within a few hours, I started seeing recommendations for all of my resources. Okay, well, I'm 3 minutes over now, so.